All right. So, and look, David started it for us, so we'll get started here in a second. We have a nice quorum here, so welcome everybody. Another Tuesday, and we have another amazing speaker. And this kind of all happened by happenstance. That that next week, Monday, I'll be recording with Chris some live, it's called Real Emergency, where we have video from an actual event. And this happens to be a road race in Falmouth, Massachusetts, where people were dropping with heat stroke. And this massive medical tent, and all these folks are inside this tent with all these kind of ice baths. And lo and behold, I come to find out the guy who was the logistics and the medical brain behind all of that, and other big races like the Boston Marathon and other big events, is Chris Troyanos, who's joining us today. So I got him on the phone and I said, Chris, we all have to know about what you do and how you do it. And he was such a nice person. He just said, I'll be there for you guys. So without any further ado, Chris, thank you so much. We can't wait to hear about what you do and how you do it. And you have on the call today EMS leaders and EMS medical directors from across the state and from other states as well. So without any further ado, I'll hand you over the microphone. Thanks for joining us.
Oh, good morning, everyone, and thank you, Dr. Antevi, for the opportunity to speak today. I got to admit, I've done this presentation a few times, and I'll admit that it's probably at least a 45-minute presentation. So I'm going to do a very quick flyby in about 20 minutes to make sure we've got plenty of room for questions and answers at the end. And I'll ask Dr. Antevi if he wants it, he can send this presentation to all that want to see it. And again, I'm available to contact after if you have any questions. But a little bit of background. I have a company called Sports Medicine Consultants, and I am basically a paid contractor for all the events that you see on the left-hand side of the screen. So I've been doing this now. I think I just wrapped up my 43rd Boston Marathon, and many of the events that you see here I've done for over 15 or 20 years. So a little bit of experience in dealing with this. Particularly event medicine and large-scale events, whether it be charity walks or road races. And I've also consulted around the world in regards to other major marathons and how this could look. So really the goal of what I'd like to do today is give you my perspective on how I see these things should be set up, because to be honest with you, not all of them are done the way that I would expect them to do. When I look at this and we come into your city and town, it's a very simple approach. And my approach is that I'm going to be playing for either that day or that weekend in your sandbox. You as EMS physicians or EMTs, paramedics, do this 365 days of the year. So when we come into your area, this has to be a coordinated effort, not only with you, but your hospitals and other parties. So you really want to kind of show how we go about doing it. So basic goals and objectives for all of these is, so we have to really determine when we come into a new event, what's the appropriate amount of medical response does the event require? Is it maybe something as simple as first aid? Or in a lot of the events that we cover, as Dr. Antevi mentioned with Falmouth and Boston particularly, we provide a much higher level of medical care. That medical care could be dealing with exertional heat stroke or even providing IVs and higher level care in these tents. We obviously don't want to become a public safety concern to your normal operations. When we come into like a town of Falmouth on the Cape, public safety still has to deal with the normal operations of that town on a daily basis. So between their EMS and their hospitals, we don't want to overload either one of them with situations that are coming out of the event. Now that is the goal. It's not always something that we can achieve based on some of the things I'll be talking about. Integration, as I mentioned earlier, with all public safety agencies, making sure that our event really adopts an incident command system that is very similar to what all of you are doing in your daily situation. And then the biggest thing too for us, and this is a hallmark of all the events that I cover, is providing a reasonable amount of medical education. And that medical education goes to our volunteers, but also our public safety partners, so we understand what we're all bringing to the table. and even more so to our runners, to make sure that our runners understand what is out there and how they could potentially help with the medical coverage and the response for that day. Planning an event like this is one, you really have to know what the event is all about. That's the event planning, medical reconnaissance. And for me, if I'm going to take on an event, I want to know the geographic layout of the start, the course, the finish line, and some of the nuances that may have with it. I put negotiations in here just to make sure, and again, I'll talk about this a little later as well, that when we're talking about this industry, the road race industry particularly, it's a big business. There's a lot of money involved here. We just did a race this past weekend that had roughly about 5,000 runners in it. They're being charged roughly on the low end $85 to run in that event. So again, you could bring out your calculators and understand what kind of numbers that they're seeing as a business making proposition. So that needs to really be understood. Talked about level of care, oversight. Well, who is the oversight? As I said, I'm the medical coordinator. I'm not the medical director. So in each one of the events that I've listed, there is a physician, whether they be a cardiologist, an ED doc, not so much orthopedics, but mostly ED docs, that are my medical directors. And what I do as a medical coordinator is make sure that everything that happens medically is done the way they want. I am basically, they're my direct report, not so much the event, but the physician, so that it's done the way they want. And again, as you know, as physicians, you don't have time to put all this together. So that's where someone like me comes into play. Medical staffing, I'll talk a little bit about that, how we secure that staffing, but what about the training of that staff and license checks and making sure that whoever you're bringing in to your medical tents or involved in this are the appropriate people. And again, as I said before, they've got to be trained. What are our triage protocols? Again, when Dr. Tevi mentioned at Falmouth, we had roughly 100 people come into that medical tent, the finish line medical tent, in a 2-hour period of time. So triage and understanding the flow and how to manage that comes into play. We bring in a large amount of equipment and supplies to be able to handle that kind of surge capacity. Transportation, again, it comes into a number of different factors, whether it be on the course or how you're transporting your volunteers in other situations. Liability, again, it's a major piece. I mean, you look at all the people that we ask to come in as volunteers. In all of our events, we're providing a level of medical liability coverage, because if I was asked to volunteer for an event and you're not providing that, I am not volunteering. We do a lot in the way of documentation, and that would be medical records, HIPAA release forms, refusal of care forms, and a variety of other things to make sure that we've got written documentation and actually starting to make inroads towards electronic medical records and medical tracking electronically. But that's a whole nother discussion. And then, you know, the comms plan, and I've got another slide on this, but again, communications is vital for all aspects of an event that we put together. So, you know, when I look at the industry, and again, I've done a lot of different talks all over the area and in the world, and we need to really make sure that we're doing a better job of coordinating with our race directors and different race organizations, making sure that what we're doing is also scalable and affordable. I mean, look, I freely admit, being the medical coordinator of the Boston Marathon, I have a very large budget, but that's not always the case. So whatever I'm able to design for Boston has to be scalable for other small events, no matter where they are. We talked about education, reporting, all of these different things come into play in regards to just industry standards. And I mentioned earlier, this is big business. So, you know, I've always looked at the coverage of a road race to be, you know, kind of in the realm of sports medicine. Probably about 10 or 12 years into it, realized that it's a combination of sports medicine and emergency medicine. But I'd say in the last 5 years, really started to do some research in regards to event medicine, mass participatory medicine, disaster medicine. And there's no question there are definite commonalities in all those different approaches. And we've started to work with some people in disaster medicine with us in Boston to kind of do some risk assessments and understanding things that can happen. And one of the things we're looking at, the reason I put these 3 photos up, is that we've not done, and I'll say this for Boston, not done a good job of understanding what crowd control and crowd crush injuries and basically some type of a situation that's going to get all these people moving in different directions. And I think we saw some of those issues happening. I think was it recently in Korea that are a concern. And with that, all of these other pieces, whether it be weather, which is obviously a major concern for us across the board, but terror alerts and terrorism, as I've experienced in Boston in 2013, are still major concerns for us in Boston, even 10 years later, and they're not going away. And I think all events have to keep that in mind as they go through with their planning. So, one of the things that's difficult when I deal with my event directors in designing a plan is what is too much, or what is enough, really. That you've got to understand what your surge capacities are. And with those surge capacities, what can your volunteer group handle versus your EMS support, which should be a very strong partnership moving forward. Understanding weather fluctuations. We just did an event in Cambridge, which is the other side of the river in Boston on Sunday, 5,000 people, and it was a very difficult day. It was warm, but more humid than it was hot. And we probably ended up sending 14 people to the hospital. And during that period of time, we had 12 or 13 exertional heat strokes. Higher than I expected, yes, but again, we were ready to handle it. But again, those weather fluctuations in November, having something that is a 70-degree day in Boston is just unheard of. But again, with climate change and the like, these are things that we've got to pay attention to. The course difficulty, again, those come into play. Every course is a little bit different, whether it be a loop course or point to point. Again, how you lay out your coverage depends on that. We like to do this a lot, is we like to work with our public safety partners to use the event as a training exercise. We've done that consistently. Many years ago, we brought in DMAT and HHS to use the Boston Marathon as part of that. They haven't done that in a while, but again, it's been a great partnership for us. So appropriate medical coverage. This is how I look at it. So I'll just use a simple number of 10,000 participants. And again, based on weather, and every event that I cover, I'm always looking at and making a bit of a history on what are my weather fluctuations, what were the number of people we treated, the number of people we transported, all the encounters, so that we can start to see trends and patterns throughout the year. So that when I talk to my medical people at the events, that we want to be able to handle 1 to 2% of the field size in our medical care. And again, that's us and public safety. If it gets above that 2 or 3%, then obviously that's a little bit more of a difficult day. And then there's going to be concerns about if we're getting above a 3% or more, can we handle it? And where does that then get into a public safety concern for everyone involved? And with that, when do we cancel the race? We've had discussions in Boston. We've never canceled the Boston Marathon, but there have been some very strong discussions on it. And one of the fears that we have with Boston is that if we did cancel, knowing how many people are coming from out of town and how many people are training, and we decide a day before that we're going to cancel that race, and again, understand there's 30,000 people, we feel that a percentage, 5, 6, 7, 8,000 people are going to drive out to Hopkinton and run the race regardless of what we do. So where does that put our public safety partners on the course in handling something when we step away? I'm not comfortable with doing that. So we've had to make some very difficult decisions about either go or no go. And there are going to be more and more of these coming down the pipe. So some of the responsibilities that we have, or I have, or my medical director has on various different topics. And again, you can see the level and the depth in which we go in making sure that we've got a protocol, whether it be medical protocols or logistical protocols, communication protocols that are shared with our volunteers, shared with our public safety folks, and understand that some of our protocols, and as Dr. Antebi mentioned earlier, exertional heat stroke, what we're doing is very different from what you're doing in the field or in the hospital. So our protocols are different. And it's important that there's an understanding of how that works. And again, That's where the education piece comes into play. But again, these are all pieces that, and there are probably about 2 or 3 more slides I could have added to this, that what I see as my responsibilities when I'm dealing with an event. So, establishing a medical team, again, this is not easy. For Boston, to give you an example, I have, and I'm very fortunate here, 1,800 medical volunteers. I'm helping out that day, and it's a long day. It starts roughly about 6 in the morning and ends around 6 or 7 o'clock at night. And it's a multidisciplinary team, from physicians, nurses, EMTs, paramedics, physical therapists, on and on and on. And then also a lot of students from each of the different medical specialties. We solicit from the hospitals, sports medicine clinics, American Red Cross, Medical Reserve, family, friends. We have a lot of amateur radio operators to help out with communications. And what we try to do is make sure that this is an extremely positive experience. All of my medical volunteers, I would like to tell you, and I hope they would tell you, is that they have a lot of information. They're walking into a volunteer opportunity that they're going to, one, value, but they're going to know that they're getting a lot of information, whether it be things basically as far as what to wear, parking, how we're going to feed them, but more or less the logistics and protocols they're going to have in advance. So there's never a question about roles and responsibilities once they enter one of my medical tents. And again, these are some of the things that we do for volunteer retention. And, it's to tell a physician, well, look, you're going to work 12 hours on a Monday in April, and you're going to get a jacket out of the deal. Is that really enough? My answer to that is absolutely not. But again, that's why it's important that we're doing everything we can to make the experience positive. And one of the things I'm very proud of in Boston is we've created a very robust distance learning platform with a variety of different medical, logistics, and communication videos. And our plan is eventually to add CMEs to those medical videos so that the licensed medical volunteers are getting a little bit more out of the experience, but that's still yet to come. Medical coverage locations, again, just to give you an idea, start line. And again, when I talk about this in more depth, I talk about density. Whether I think the smallest event that I do is roughly around 5,000 people, the largest 30, is that you've got density at the start and density even more so at the finish line, with family and friends and people meeting the runners. So being able to see, respond, and react to medical issues, and again, anywhere on a 26.2 mile or 10K course, that's the ultimate goal, is that we can't be everywhere. We know that. But to be able to respond quickly is an absolute must. And you can see basically how we do that. And, as we tell our medical folks that if someone goes down, we want to be able to respond in probably 3.5, 4 minutes or less for obvious reasons of any cardiac arrest. And we've had a multitude of those, and I haven't lost anyone in a couple of years on that. But again, that's, as I always say, you cannot prevent a cardiac arrest at these events. All you can do is make sure that you're responding accordingly and as quick as you can. So again, these are some of the areas that we deal with. Family meeting is a very difficult area for us because, how do you, and we do this, I hope well, but how do you deal with the family, whether they're in the medical tents or they're being sent to the hospital? And we have protocols in place to make sure that we're reaching out to family to notify them of what's going on and where they need to go. And even more so, I know this sounds a little strange, but one of my protocols in any event is that if any of our runners are transported and admitted overnight to a hospital, I call that family up or the runner up to check and see how they're doing and what can we do as an event. I find that as a means to just double check to make sure they're doing well, but also to, really it's kind of what I consider a public safety customer service approach in double checking what's going on out there. And we get lists from either the Department of Public Health or the hospitals in regards to who's out and being held overnight. I just wanted to throw this in there real quick. I'm almost done. Is just kind of a grid map. And again, I think it's important as you're looking at your events, we grid map basically the finish and the start. And we do this as we've got medical volunteers in Boston EMS throughout this whole grid. So if a runner goes down and we get a call on say 9L9, we know within a 25-yard period where we need to go, because you have to understand, as runners come across that finish line on Boylston Street and come down, you get 30,000 people. That's a congested road and a very narrow road. But once you get into St. James Street, Stewart Street, that's where the family and friends start to migrate. So we're looking at higher density. So you're not going to be able to visually see potentially someone down and be able to respond to it. So that's where the grid map comes in. And you can see that, basically in Boston, I've got a medical tent A that has roughly, I think, 200 beds in it, medical tent B, 175. I've got a smaller medical in the Dorothy Quincy suite for my massage group. And then we do in the Fairmont Copley an elite medical as well. So we've got a multitude of medical stations throughout the course of this map. But again, I think that the biggest takeaway here is understanding the grid map. I think that's vitally important in any event that you do. Give you an idea of what medical tent A looks like. Again, relatively big. I think it's about over 200 feet by 66 feet. And again, we section things off. We have an ICU section. We've got a heat deck. We actually do our labs right here in this tent. And then every section has a subset of cots, supplies, and a specific number of medical people in it. And it's worked well for us. But actually, I'm going to change this a little bit coming up in April. Medical communications, and again, I know I'm sorry I'm flying by, I'm running out of time. I think the biggest thing here is that we need to have redundant systems, and we do. We do not rely on cell phones. We knew in 2013 that cell phones went out. But again, the bigger thing here is to make sure that the event system and public safety systems are integrated in some way, shape, or form. And that might just mean 2 radios. But if we're not talking together and coordinating what's happening together, that is a massive mistake. And then developing new technologies. We've been using text messaging on a major front with emergency messaging, and there's new apps. I think there's one that we're looking at now called My 3 Words, where you can be able to call someone in and within a 3-meter square know exactly where to find them, similar to the grid map approach, but again, new technologies to do that. Again, as I mentioned earlier, there needs to be a coordination here. I mean, if the one thing that we know with these events, that they all need to apply for a permit in your cities and towns. So whether it be if you're fire, police, EMS, you need to make sure that the medical side of the event is doing what you want them to do. This is where I talked about playing in your sandbox. They've got to meet your standards. So that integration and building relationships is absolutely vital. And that's what my role is for the Boston Marathon, is I have relationships with 8 cities and towns, federal and state throughout the board in regards to what we need to do. So there's a understanding of what we both bring to the table. I'm going to bypass this. And then just quickly, some of the concerns that we have. And again, these are things that we normally see in an event. This picture will show you what our exertional heat stroke looks like and how we cool them, but that's for another time. But again, our protocols are slightly different from hospital or pre-hospital approaches. But again, they've worked for us for years. And again, there's an understanding on both sides of how to do it. So I'm going to stop there. I think I'm a little bit over. I'm sorry, Dr. Antebi, but
that was perfect.
Very quick.
That was perfect. And actually, there's someone on the call here. He's going today by Care and Sympathy. It's actually Dr. Paul Pepe, who has written the book on event medicine. And I know you guys will hit it off, but Dr. Pepe, are you there? And I would love to hear your comments.
I am here for you for 2 minutes, maybe. All right.
Yeah, that's all we need. Good.
Thanks a lot for your help here. I really appreciate it. One of the coolest things, I'm kind of glad you brought up the marathons, because they're one of the, besides the extreme sports, that's one of the major challenges, because it's a moving target for the individuals as they're collapsing. You don't know where they are sometimes in the event. That's why you got to have spotters and so on. In most situations, also, we tell people if there's going to be mass audiences to have a buddy system. So if one of you go down, the other person can call. And obviously that doesn't quite apply in that circumstance. So what I understand is in some marathons, I don't know if the ones you're in have now been putting chips in people's, the little badges that they carry that, that says what their number is and so on. Has that been of utility for you?
It has been, and one of the things that we do for Boston particularly is that what we do is we have on their bibs a barcode. So it's kind of
Right.
old-fashioned versus a QR code.
It's called a bib. That's exactly what. Okay, go ahead. Yes.
And what we do is we're scanning those individuals in and out of all of our medical tents on the course, the finish line, but also our hospitals. So that gets into that family relations piece where I'm able to know and get situational awareness in real time about who's where and what's happening. So yes, we are using that technology.
Oh, fantastic. So, all right. Well, listen, I need to unfortunately get over to the other thing. I could talk to you for a long time, but we'll catch up later on. But thanks for doing that, and thanks for the great presentation today, and so on. Peter, thanks a lot. I'm going to move over to other realms. Okay, so
I'll make sure to connect you, you and Chris, Paul. Okay. I think you guys.
One thing you should know is that the CME code today, if you didn't catch it in the chat, is 15328. 15328. Okay.
Yes.
If you haven't done so, please vote early, play and vote often. Okay. So no, just kidding. That's all they want. They're going to need to hear today, right? So yeah, but thank everybody here and for getting through another year. We'll see you later. Okay. And Joseph, I'll see you on the other end, right?
Yes, I will see you there.
All right, good. Thanks. I'll see you.
Awesome. Thanks, Paul. Anybody else have any questions? Chris, obviously you're the guy who we would be communicating with from an EMS perspective, whether it be medical director or EMS leadership, when you would come into our town. And this is a question I asked you yesterday, but I wanted everyone to hear also, is that, here in Miami, I did the 13-mile walk with the firefighters this past year. It was so hot and humid, and I didn't see the kind of massive type of medical tent thing that you're talking about. Why is one marathon race different than another, especially in Miami?
Well, I can't speak for the one that you were at, but I think that the one thing I've seen, Dr. Intevi, in the industry is that race directors don't want to spend the money. They'll talk safety, until they're blue in the face, but if they've got to spend money on this thing, they're a little reluctant. They're watching their pennies, even though, as I said, it is a big business and they do make a good amount of money. But some of the race directors feel that they can get away with, just getting a couple of ambulances on the course of the finish line and putting an EMT out there, which, look, in some instances could work, but there's so much more that can happen. And I think ultimately the town has to look at these permits and have some standards in regards to what the event it can do. And if they're not bringing certain things to the table, I think that they're making a mistake.
100% agree. And I think that puts a kind of extra push on us as EMS to try and figure it out when it all goes wrong, which is the big problem.
I think that a lot of you would agree that one of the things we're seeing, and particularly after COVID, is that, and we've had this happen in the last 4 events, that my EMS partners are having trouble staffing the event. I mean, usually it's the special operations group that are dealing with this, and to get them, their employees to get a Sunday and come in and work, they're having trouble filling what they would normally do. So they're looking for us, the event medicals folks, to fill in those gaps.
Right. 100%. All right. Dr. Daya asked if these materials are available for review. If it's okay, can I share your PowerPoint, and then I share this video. We record these as well. If that's okay with you, Chris?
Absolutely, please. And again, anyone can call me later on if they like, and I'd be happy to have a conversation.
You know what I'll do? Maybe just for I'll do it now so I can get it done. Is what if I put your email in the chat?
Yeah, that would be fine.
I do that?
Yes, please.
Okay. All right. I'll get that done in a second here. All right. Well, Chris, really appreciate your expertise. I learned a lot, and I also put in the chat a link for our next Monday Real Emergency, where we're going to have not live, but actual video from the Falmouth Road Race, and we have a number of individuals who are treated with hyperthermia, exertional heat stroke, I think we had a temperature, you guys had like a 108 or 109. These people coming in altered and watching and witnessing what you guys did on scene for many of those patients, I think is invaluable for us in EMS to see. And then I know you're going to have some ideas and thoughts for how do we do it without the equipment, without the baths of ice and so forth. So for people who are interested in watching that video, please click on the link that's in the chat. And I have Chris's email right here, and I'm going to put it in the chat. And then Joseph has been kind enough to handle the Eagles restream. So we appreciate Chris you coming on, and we're going to hop over to Dr. Pepe's webinar, and you and I will be in touch. Thank you
Sounds
so
good.
much.
Again, thank you for the opportunity.
Appreciate you. All right. Bye, everybody. Thank you.